Module 17, Part 3, Tiers 2 and 3, Supports and Interventions. In this part, we'll explore interventions and supports for students with inappropriate behaviors. While PBIS's Tier 1 focused on proactive strategies, including teaching expectations and reinforcing appropriate behaviors, research indicates that not all students will be successful with this approach. Looking at our three-tiered model, tiers 2 and 3 are for students who are struggling with their behavior. These tiers, which are much smaller because they represent a smaller portion of the population who is struggling, provides extra layers of support through evidence-based interventions. Many of these students are viewed as at-risk students because they are at risk for academic failure and even dropping out of high school. They are also at risk for punitive behavior measures such as suspensions and even expulsions. We know the trajectory for students with failing grades and those who are suspended often. Unfortunately, it's bleak. Many of them drop out. Therefore, it is important to put these interventions in place to help students. At-risk students greatly benefit from PBIS because it provides clearly defined expectations, frequent feedback on their behavior, and lots of positive reinforcement, which we know is the best way to change behavior. We also know that students who have problem behaviors are often struggling academically as well. So it is important to help these students with both behavior and academics. Also, because the work of tiers 2 and 3 often has staff members working in small groups or even with individual students, there are more opportunities for students to build relationships with staff. Research shows that students who build positive relationships are more likely to succeed both academically and behaviorally. Before we can start a conversation about the interventions provided in tiers 2 and 3, let's take a minute to think about why students misbehave in the first place. Sometimes it may seem as if there is no answer to this question other than they just do. But there is actually a connection between misbehavior and brain development. Let's watch this video to learn a little bit more.
So I want to talk for a minute about how to teach the brain. One of the really important things that we know in trauma is that when we help people understand the injury trauma creates in the brain and help them understand how that impacts the way they respond to other events in the world, it really helps them and their families move forward in their healing. So lots of people have given ways to teach the brain. As a practitioner myself, I've taken a lot of the models from Dr. Dan Siegel, taken models from the Hahn Foundation for teaching in the optimistic classroom, and looking at some of the things Ledoux has done, and put them together and really challenged myself and folks that I educate about practicing really teaching the brain. So when I explain this to teenagers, I start with the hand model, okay? And I start by explaining that we're going to talk about the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain that everyone has. Formally, this is called the limbic system, and this is called the cerebral cortex. But what we're going to talk is downstairs brain and upstairs brain. So in your downstairs brain, this is where fight, flight, or freeze lives, okay? When threat comes at you, your body has 3 reactions it can make. It can fight, it can run away, or it can stay very still until the danger's gone. That's what this brain does, okay? This part of the brain. What's up here, the upstairs brain, its job, among many other things, is to solve problems, to help you calm down, solve problems, okay? And to tell the downstairs brain, I got this. We're gonna be okay. There's another solution. So what happens a lot of times to kids who've experienced trauma is if you think about these like muscles, because you've gone through a lot of threat, this downstairs part of the brain's been doing push-ups your whole life, okay? So this part of the brain's really strong. The part of your brain that solves problems hasn't had as much exercise because you've had to be really strong to be a survivor, a thriver. So what happens is that the brain gets what I call emotionally hijacked. This downstairs brain comes up on top of this brain, it takes over, okay? So the downstairs brain's in control. And so you fight, you run, you freeze. The only things that work when you're down here are things that calm you down. So we call them self-regulation skills. And that happens from connection, somebody talking to you, helping you breathe, helping you feel your body calm down. Once that happens, then the upstairs brain can come back, and then you can solve problems. So that's how I try to explain to teenagers the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain, and what happens to them when they experience a threat. With young children, what I found is they like animals. When I say young, probably 3 to 8 years old. Sometimes teenagers like it too. And so what we call this is the downstairs brain, that threat center again, is what I call the barking dog. If you think about when any noise or threat makes, usually a dog will bark. So this is the barking dog, okay? A problem solver is often called the wise owl. So upstairs is the wise owl, downstairs is the barking dog, okay? When the dog barks, the owl flies away. And so when the dog's barking, the only things they can do are maybe practice blowing bubbles, maybe practice breathing deeply, things that help the dog start calming down. And that's where you build their self-care strategies. They practice lots of different things to help the dog stop barking. The first skill being recognizing when their dog barks. Once they learn how to calm the barking dog, then the owl flies back, and then they can come up with solutions. And again, they're trying to get this muscle stronger. The problem for most people who are intervening, if you're talking to a family, most parents are going to naturally start with redirection and consequences for negative behavior. That's the first place they go. They're shaking fingers and telling somebody, stop that, you need to do this. That's an upstairs brain intervention, while most children who've experienced trauma are downstairs. So the term Siegel uses is you connect, then you redirect. The only thing that will calm a barking dog or the downstairs brain is helping that child calm down. And only then, once you teach the child to calm down, can you engage the part of the brain that solves problems and actually come up with solutions for better behavior choices. And that's why it's important to respond to the need, respond to the safety needs that get kicked up by threat, and not just react to the behavior that happens.
Now that we understand a little bit more about what's actually happening in a student's brain during misbehavior, let's talk a little bit more about the specific adolescent brain. Stop and think for a moment. Are you the same person that you were in 9th grade? Like plants, the brain develops in different stages. It's very likely that you are much different than you were in 9th grade because your brain continued to develop and mature into adulthood. When thinking about why students misbehave, it is important to keep this brain development in mind. Sometimes adults are asking students to do things that they developmentally are not able to do. Here's a few more things to think about with the adolescent brain. The human brain is not fully developed until age 25. Keep in mind that is way past the point of high school and even college for most young adults. As the brain develops, it gets better at balancing impulse, desire, goals, self-interest, rules, ethics, and even altruism. Think about students you know who struggle with behavior. What misbehaviors do you see most? Is it impulsivity? Is it not following rules or failing to act respectfully? If so, some of this misbehavior is explained simply by their brain development. The areas of the brain that are still developing are called the frontal lobes. They are not yet fully connected, which means that access is slower. So when students are processing or contemplating their behavior, asking themselves internally things like, is that a good idea? Or what is the consequence of this action? The answers may not be as clear to them as it is to adults. Knowing this can help paraprofessionals and school staff understand that when it comes to misbehavior, students need many repetitions of the rules and expectations. The video on the brain also solidifies that students who have experienced trauma in their downstairs brain are going to need extra support and prompting from staff. This ties in well to the work of tiers 2 and 3 in PBIS because staff members can talk students through the process of determining the potential consequences of certain behaviors and giving strategies for calming down. Thinking about the why of students' misbehavior is another important part of tiers 2 and tiers 3. This flowchart demonstrates the investigation process that teachers and school administrators often use when thinking about the motivation behind a student's behavior. Again, using the just because they do is not really determining what the function of the behavior is or why the students are misbehaving. Simply, there is no just because. Let's try an example. If a student is acting out before third period almost every day, a teacher may determine that the reason the student is misbehaving is because math class is coming up in third period and the student struggles in math. Rather than being in the class and feeling frustrated, overwhelmed, or maybe even stupid, the student would rather avoid math class altogether and be sent to the principal's office instead. In this case, the punishment of the student being sent out of the classroom is actually reinforcing to the student. They are getting what they want, which is to avoid math, even if it means being in trouble with the principal. An intervention for this student wouldn't really be a behavior intervention at all. It would be about giving the student extra support in math so that they could be successful in the class. Let's try another example. A student may be acting out to obtain the attention of their peers. If during recess, a student is frequently running out of the playground area, throwing wood chips and hitting peers, they may actually be trying to get their peers' attention. But unfortunately, they do not have the social skills that allow them to appropriately interact with other students. In this scenario, being sent to the principal's office is not a logical consequence because it does nothing to teach the needed social skills. Instead, the student would attend a social skills group as part of tier 2 or tier 3 interventions. Working with a school social worker and learning how to interact appropriately with peers will lead to the playground misbehavior decreasing. PBIS programs have a different view of traditional punitive discipline. PBIS views behavior as a form of communication and encourages staff members to identify the functions of behaviors, like the flow chart on the previous slide, and also to directly teach those expected behaviors through interventions. PBIS understands that traditional approaches like detention and suspension do little to remediate behaviors in the long term because they do not address the underlying reasons for the misbehavior. The PBIS approach allows students to receive the exact supports that they need within the context of the school. Tier 3 is considered the most intensive part of the PBIS triangle. For students with significant and chronic behaviors, schools often partner with community-based programs to provide more individualized help for students and families. Many schools have a student assistance program referred to as SAP, which can connect families and students to services like counseling and trauma-informed care outside of the school building. Some communities have services that actually provide therapists and counselors to come into the school and provide those types of services to the students with the most intensive needs. As a paraprofessional, you may be asked to collect data as part of an FBA, which is a specialized program for behavior, many times for students with special needs. This is another example of a tier 3 support because students are receiving a full plan of how they will have their behaviors tracked and taught. This ends section 3. Please complete the questions below before moving on to the final section of the module. Thank you.